The most exclusive restaurant in New York City stopped when Japanese millionaire Keiko Tanaka began breathing heavily, bringing her hand to her chest while her eyes filled with terror. Waiters ran around confused, not understanding what was happening. Millionaire customers looked uncomfortable, and the director desperately called an ambulance in English, while the woman continued whispering incomprehensible words in Japanese. No one knew Keiko was having a panic attack because she had recognized among the diners the man who had killed her son 30 years before in an accident, never resolved. But when Sofia Nakamura, part-time waitress who worked to pay for university, approached and spoke to her softly in perfect Japanese, everything changed. Keiko clung to her like a lifeline and whispered the truth she had kept for decades. Her son's killer was sitting at table number 7, and she had come to America for one reason only: revenge. Which city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The Golden Restaurant in New York City was the type of place where the world's powerful gathered to decide the fate of nations and companies. That November night, among tables illuminated by candles that cost more than a normal salary, sat Russian oligarchs, American magnates, and European aristocrats who spoke in low voices about million-dollar investments. But everyone present noticed when she entered. Keiko Tanaka was 72 years old and had a dignity that filled the room. She wore a black silk kimono that must have been worth a fortune. Her silver hair was gathered in a perfect bun, and around her neck a pearl necklace that shone under the dim lights. She was accompanied by 2 men in dark suits who emanated that aura of discreet professionalism, typical of high-level bodyguards. Sofia Nakamura observed the scene from her position behind the service bar. At 22 years old, the Hispanic-Japanese girl worked as a part-time waitress to pay for her international economic studies at Columbia University. Her paternal grandmother was Japanese. She had taught her the language and traditions, but Sofia had never expected those skills would become so important. The restaurant director, Maximilian Conde, personally received Mrs. Tanaka with the respect due to someone whose assets were estimated at over $3 billion. Keiko was the widow of a great Japanese industrialist, and now controlled an empire spanning from electronics to luxury goods. Her presence in the restaurant was an event that would be talked about for weeks in New York high finance circles. Sofia immediately noticed something strange in the woman's behavior. While being escorted to her reserved table, Keiko obsessively examined the other diners as if she were looking for someone specific. Her eyes moved with surgical precision from one face to another, and when they settled on a distinguished man about 60 years old sitting at table number 7, Sofia saw something that made her shudder. On Keiko Tanaka's face appeared an expression of pure hatred, immediately followed by something that looked like terror. The man at table 7 was evidently American. He was dining with what appeared to be his wife and 2 other couples. He laughed loudly, telling some work anecdote. He had no idea someone was watching him with such intensity. Keiko sat at her table, but didn't touch the menu. She ordered only green tea and remained seated rigidly with her eyes fixed on the man at table 7. Her bodyguards noticed the tension and exchanged worried glances but didn't intervene. Sofia, who had learned to read people during her years of work in the restaurant sector, understood something important was happening. The situation precipitated around 10 p.m. The man from table 7 stood up to go to the bathroom, and in doing so turned slightly toward Keiko's direction. Their gazes crossed for a fraction of a second, and what happened next shocked the entire restaurant. Keiko began breathing heavily, bringing one hand to her chest while the other gripped the table. Her eyes filled with tears and she began whispering something in Japanese, her voice increasingly agitated. The bodyguards approached immediately, but she rejected them with frantic gestures, continuing to stare at the man, who now observed her with curiosity and slight concern. Director Conde rushed over, extremely worried. A crisis from such an important client in his restaurant could mean the end of his career. He began speaking in English, asking if she needed medical help, if he should call an ambulance. But Keiko continued repeating phrases in Japanese that no one understood, increasingly agitated. It was then that Sofia made the most important decision of her life. She left her position behind the bar and approached Keiko softly, kneeling beside her chair. In perfect Japanese, with the accent her grandmother had taught her. She whispered, "Tanaka-san, watashi wa anata wo tasukeru koto ga dekimasu. Nani ga okotta no desu ka?" The effect was immediate. Keiko turned to Sofia with eyes full of desperation and relief, as if she had seen an angel. She clung to the young woman's hand and began speaking rapidly in Japanese, words flowing like an overflowing river after years of forced silence. What Keiko told Sofia in those agitated minutes would forever change their lives. 30 years before, her 18-year-old son, Hiroshi, had died in a traffic accident in New York City during a student exchange. The driver had fled, the case had been archived, but Keiko had never stopped searching for the truth. She had spent millions on private investigators, had followed every lead, and finally had found her son's killer. The man at table 7 was Roberto Castilla, then young scion of an industrial family from New York. In 1994, he was in New York City on business. He had hit Hiroshi while driving drunk, and then had fled using family connections to cover everything up. Keiko had taken 30 years to gather sufficient evidence and locate him. Now she had come to America with a precise plan to ruin him economically, socially, legally. But seeing his face in person, hearing his laughter, had brought back a pain so intense it caused her a panic attack. Sofia listened in silence while Keiko explained she intended to destroy this man piece by piece, just as he had destroyed her family. But what neither Keiko nor Sofia knew was that Roberto Castilla had recognized both of them. He had heard their exchange in Japanese and had understood his past had finally come to light. And now he was planning his move to eliminate them both before they could ruin this life he had built on the ashes of that young man dead. 30 years before, in the days following that dramatic encounter in the restaurant, Sofia found herself catapulted into a world of secrets, revenge, and denied justice that went far beyond her experience as a university student. Keiko Tanaka wasn't just a rich widow seeking truth. She was a woman who had dedicated half her life to planning the methodical destruction of the man who had killed her son. Keiko invited Sofia to her suite at the Plaza Hotel, a luxury apartment she had transformed into a true operations center. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps, and a detailed chronology of 30 years of investigations. In the center of everything was a photo of Hiroshi Tanaka, a smiling 18-year-old young man with eyes full of dreams he would never realize. The story Keiko told Sofia was one of injustice that had crossed decades. In 1994, Hiroshi was in New York City to perfect his English before beginning university studies. He was a brilliant young man, passionate about art and literature, who dreamed of becoming a cultural bridge between Japan and America. The night of the accident, he was walking back from the library when Roberto Castilla, then 24 years old, had hit him at high speed. Witnesses had seen a black BMW flee the scene of the accident, but investigations had been incredibly superficial. The Castilla family had enormous political and economic influence, and the case had been quickly archived as an accident with unknown driver who fled. Hiroshi had died instantly. His dreams shattered along with his body, but Keiko had never given up. She had hired private investigators, had bribed officials to access classified documents, had followed every lead for decades. The breakthrough had come 2 years before, when she had managed to identify Roberto as responsible through a combination of modern technology and infinite patience. Sofia listened fascinated while Keiko showed her the accumulated evidence, photos of the damaged BMW repaired in secret, testimonies from mechanics who had been paid to keep quiet, recordings of compromising conversations obtained over the years. Roberto Castilla had built his current fortune also thanks to never having paid for that crime. He hadn't had to face costly trials or the reputational damage that would have resulted. But what most impacted Sofia was discovering Roberto hadn't stopped at that hit and run. In the following 30 years, he had accumulated a list of financial crimes, corruptions, and ethically questionable behaviors that made the 1994 accident pale. He had become a serial predator in the business world, ruining small family businesses to expand his empire, corrupting politicians, evading taxes on an industrial scale. Keiko had planned her revenge with Japanese precision. She didn't simply want to kill him or have him arrested. She wanted him to lose everything he had built on her son's blood. She wanted his children to see their father for what he really was, for his wife to discover she had married a killer. for his partners to abandon him when the truth came to light. Keiko's plan had been underway for months. She had secretly acquired shares in several of Roberto's partner companies. She had gathered compromising information about his illegal businesses. She had prepared a media campaign that would destroy his reputation. But that night in the restaurant, seeing her son's killer's face had emotionally overwhelmed her. Sofia found herself increasingly deeply involved in this story of denied justice. Keiko needed someone who could move freely in the New York environment, someone who spoke both Spanish and Japanese perfectly. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Someone who could be her eyes and ears where she couldn't reach. The young woman was perfect for that role. But Sofia didn't know that accepting to help Keiko would put her in mortal danger. Roberto Castilla had recognized the threat the two women represented and was already planning their elimination. He had contacts in New York's criminal world, people who for the right amount were willing to make anyone disappear. And Keiko Tanaka, however rich and powerful, was just a foreigner alone in a country she didn't really know. The war between Keiko and Roberto was about to begin, a war that would involve not only the two of them, but also the people they loved. Sofia was about to discover that sometimes the search for justice can bring consequences no one is prepared to face. Keiko's revenge began with a precision that reflected 30 years of methodical planning. Sofia became her unofficial assistant, using her position in the restaurant and her economic studies to infiltrate the New York business environment. The young woman discovered she had a natural talent for this world of subterfuge and complex strategies, aided by her ability to move invisibly between two cultures. The first blow was financial. Keiko publicly revealed through an anonymous dossier sent to financial newspapers Roberto's tax irregularities, documents she had obtained by bribing officials from his own staff. The effect was devastating. The IRS immediately opened an investigation. Investors began withdrawing funds, and his company's value plummeted 40% in 1 week. Roberto immediately understood he was under attack, but couldn't identify the enemy. The evidence was too precise to be coincidental, too targeted to be generic. Someone had been studying him for years. He hired private investigators to discover who was behind the attack, but Keiko had covered her tracks too well. The second blow was personal. Keiko had photos documenting his extramarital affairs from the last 10 years delivered to Roberto's wife through a mutual friend. Photos she had obtained by hiring investigators who had been following Roberto since 2010. The woman, discovering her husband's systematic betrayal, immediately filed for divorce and separation of assets, taking half the family estate. But it was the third blow that demonstrated the true ruthless nature of this war. Keiko managed to convince Roberto's eldest son, Marcos, to meet with Sofia in a downtown bar. The young woman, posing as a freelance journalist interested in a story about the Castilla family, gradually revealed to Marcos the truth about the 1994 accident. She showed him the evidence, the documents, the photographs. The young man was devastated to discover his father was a killer. Roberto realized someone knew his darkest secret when Marcos confronted him that same night asking about Hiroshi Tanaka's death. The reaction was immediate and violent. Roberto understood the time had come to physically eliminate the threat, before his past completely destroyed his present. He started with Sofia. Roberto had identified the young woman as the key connection between him and the mysterious enemy. He had Sofia followed by professionals. He discovered where she lived, what her habits were. Then he organized what should look like a casual accident. A car that lost its brakes just as Sofia crossed the street near the university. But Keiko had foreseen even this move. Her bodyguards had been protecting Sofia for weeks, and they intervened at the crucial moment, pushing the young woman out of the trajectory of the killer car. The driver, a criminal hired by Roberto, crashed into a tree and died instantly before he could confess who had paid him. The failed attack was an open declaration of war. Keiko understood Roberto was willing to do anything to protect his secret, including murder. Sofia realized for the first time how dangerous the game was in which she was participating. But instead of withdrawing, both women decided to intensify the attack. The final blow was already in preparation. A press conference where Keiko would publicly reveal the identity of her son's killer, backed by incontrovertible evidence and Sofia's testimony as interpreter and witness. But Roberto had planned his final move. to eliminate both women during the press conference itself, so they would appear victims of a random terrorist attack. The final battle between justice and impunity was about to begin. The press conference was held in New York's most luxurious hotel with international journalists who had been attracted by the promise of a shocking revelation that would involve important figures of the establishment. Keiko had orchestrated everything with military precision. Every detail had been planned to maximize the media impact of her revelation. Sofia sat next to Keiko, her heart beating uncontrollably, while simultaneously translating the woman's statements from Japanese to English for the reporters present. What was about to happen would forever change their lives and Roberto Castilla's, but neither of them knew the man had placed an explosive in the hotel programmed to detonate right during the conference. Keiko began by telling Hiroshi's story, the brilliant son who dreamed of building cultural bridges between Japan and America. She showed photos of the smiling young man. She spoke of his broken dreams, of the pain of a mother who had lost everything. The journalists listened in religious silence, while Sofia translated each word with an emotional precision that transmitted all of Keiko's suffering. Then came the revelation. Keiko publicly accused Roberto Castilla of having killed her son in 1994, and of having covered up the crime using family connections. The evidence was overwhelming. Official documents proving Roberto's presence in New York that night, testimonies from mechanics who had repaired the damaged BMW, recordings of compromising conversations. The effect on the media was explosive, even before the actual explosive. Television stations interrupted their programs to broadcast the statements live. Social media filled with the story. Stock values of Castilla companies plummeted in real time. Roberto was watching everything from his office, knowing his life was ending before his eyes. But it was in that moment that Sofia made the discovery that changed everything. Noticing something strange in the nervous behavior of one of the hotel employees, she managed to identify the explosive hidden under the stage. With courage she didn't know she possessed, she immediately stopped the conference and had the room evacuated seconds before detonation. The explosion destroyed much of the conference room, but caused no casualties thanks to Sofia's timely intervention. The evidence against Roberto had already been transmitted around the world, and now an attempted multiple homicide was also added. There was no escape for him. Roberto Castilla was arrested that same night. The evidence gathered by Keiko in 30 years of investigations combined with the failed attack built an unassailable legal case. The man who had believed he could escape forever from the consequences of his actions found himself finally face to face with justice. Roberto Castilla's trial became the most followed judicial case in America that year. Sofia testified as interpreter and key witness, recounting in detail the encounter in the restaurant, Keiko's confession, and the failed attack. Her testimony was crucial to prove the premeditation and dangerousness of the accused. Keiko finally could tell her complete story publicly. 30 years of pain, investigations, sacrifices to obtain justice for her son. Her account moved all of America and became a symbol of the fight against impunity of the powerful. Roberto was sentenced to life imprisonment for voluntary manslaughter, attempted massacre, and a series of other financial crimes that had emerged during investigations. Sofia became an involuntary celebrity. The brave young woman who had saved dozens of lives and helped a mother obtain justice, but she preferred to stay focused on her studies, although now she had a completely different perspective on international justice and human rights. Keiko offered Sofia a full scholarship to finish university and then work at her foundation dedicated to victims of unsolved crimes. The young woman accepted. Understanding her destiny was linked to the fight for social justice. Together, they founded a center that helped families of victims of unpunished crimes, using Keiko's assets and Sofia's linguistic and investigative skills. The Golden Restaurant became famous worldwide as the place where one of the most incredible justice stories in modern history had begun. Director Condé, initially terrified by the scandal, discovered the notoriety had brought customers from around the world, curious to see the place where everything had started. Years after that night that had changed everything, Sofia graduated magna cum laude in international economics with a thesis on transnational financial crimes. Keiko was present at the ceremony, proud of the young woman she now considered as an adopted daughter. Together they had transformed pain into hope, revenge into social justice. The Hiroshi Tanaka Foundation had become one of the world's most respected human rights organizations, with offices in 10 countries and hundreds of cases resolved. Sofia had become the European director, specializing in crimes involving foreign victims and language barriers that often prevented access to justice. Keiko had finally found the peace she had been seeking for 30 years. Not only had she obtained justice for Hiroshi, but she had transformed her personal tragedy into a force for good that helped hundreds of other families. Roberto Castilla was serving life imprisonment. All his assets had been confiscated to compensate victims of his crimes. The story of that night in the restaurant continued to be told, becoming a symbol of how one person's courage can change the destiny of many others. Sofia often returned to the Golden Restaurant, no longer as a waitress, but as a guest, remembering the night when 2 simple words in Japanese had triggered a revolution of justice. At the table where Keiko had sat that first night, there was now a discreet plaque remembering the importance of extending a hand to those who need it, regardless of the language they speak, because sometimes it's enough to understand the right words at the right moment to save a life and change the world. The last time Keiko and Sofia dined together in the restaurant, the older woman looked at the young woman she had helped and said in perfect English, a language she had learned to honor her son's dream, "Hiroshi would have been proud of you. You realized his dream of building bridges between cultures, but you did it in the most beautiful way possible through justice." Sofia smiled, knowing her life had found a meaning that went far beyond what she ever would have imagined when she was just a student working to pay for her studies. Sometimes destiny calls us through the simplest words pronounced in the right language at the right moment. And when we answer that call, everything can change. Keiko and Sofia's story proved justice can arrive even after decades, that a mother's love for a son can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes a brave young woman who speaks Japanese is enough to change the course of history. Because the right words said at the right moment can tear down walls built with 30 years of lies and open doors to a future of truth and hope. Like, if you believe justice can arrive even after decades, comment what moment impacted you most in this story. Share to inspire those who have never stopped searching for truth. Subscribe for more stories of justice, courage, and redemption. Sometimes knowing the right language is enough to change a life. Sometimes courage is found in the most unexpected moments, and sometimes justice arrives through the hands of those you least expect. Because every word spoken with the heart can become a bridge toward hope.